Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how some automakers are deciding to silently eliminate dealerships. Before we get into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. Properly explain what's happening, we quickly need to talk about the dealership model that we have here in the United States. So if you don't know, most automakers do not sell direct to consumer. There are a few automakers that have popped up over the last decade that do sell direct to consumer, like Tesla, like Rivian, for example, but the majority of automakers sell to a third party known as a dealership, and then that dealership in turn sells the car to you. So what this means is that you are actually not the customer for the automakers. The dealership is actually the customer for the automakers because they are the party that is buying the cars from these automakers. And on top of buying the cars from the automakers, most of these dealers also will make the automakers money in the form of flooring charges, again, depending on the automaker. So some dealerships will get financing outside of the automaker, but some automakers will actually offer the financing to the dealerships where they'll say, hey, if you sell the car within 30 days, for example, you won't pay any finance charge. But if it takes you more than 30 days to sell the car, then we'll start charging you interest on this car that we have given to you. And so that's kind of like another way for automakers to make money. But regardless, for the point of today's video, all you need to know is that most automakers use car dealerships, a third party. And so now let's get into it. So over the course of the last couple of years, dealership markups have been a huge debate topic in the car world because they got so crazy over the course of the pandemic. Now, prior to the pandemic, dealership markups did exist, but they're typically reserved for more specialty type vehicles. Whereas once the pandemic happened, once we had that supply shortage, the markups got put on pretty much everything. I mean, I remember when, just regular run-of-the-mill cars, Toyota RAV4s, Kia Tellurides, so on and so forth, had huge addendums on them. And these are cars that in a normal market will typically go for MSRP or in some cases under MSRP, not $10,000, $20,000 over MSRP. And so obviously this, sparked a lot of controversy because you've got dealers saying, well, we only have this many cars, so we have to charge these markups on these cars because we're not selling as many as we used to. And this is the only way for us to make money, and we'll supply demand, right? This is what the market is doing. And then you have manufacturers that are like, hey, this is the set price on the car. This is the MSRP. This is what you sell it for. And then you have the customers, obviously in line with the manufacturer saying, hey, don't mark up these cars. This is what the set price is. And so you have this debate going back and forth. And, ultimately dealers, being the third party that gets the cars, get to determine the prices at the end of the day. But because the markups became so widespread, I mean, literally at the beginning of 2022, the average person that bought a car paid over MSRP for a car. It's basically caused a lot of manufacturers to take action. And, some of that action has been more public and some of it's been a little bit more private. So an example of a manufacturer that has been very public about things is Ford, right? We've seen so many press releases from Ford of them bashing dealers, saying that dealers shouldn't be charging markups and how they're going to cancel dealers and go direct to consumer, this and that. And all I have to say is the manufacturers that are being very public about things like Ford aren't actually doing all that much. They're really just trying to get public appeal behind their brand is what it looks like on the surface, because in reality, when it comes to Ford, for example, and I know this personally because I purchase Fords all the time, nothing's changed. Like my experience as a customer going in to buy a Ford, prior to the pandemic versus now, it's literally the same. Like there are certain cars that they just always have markups on them and there's nothing you can do about it other than trying to endlessly search through dealers to try to find that car that isn't, marked up, right? Find a dealer that's not marking up that vehicle. And so that's the first thing. And I don't think this should be really news to anyone. But what is news is there are several manufacturers that are silently trying to get rid of these over MSRP sales. And I'd have to say their tactic is way better than Ford's public tactic of just saying that we're going to get rid of dealers and this and that, because this tactic is actually working, and it's crazy how effective it is. So what these manufacturers are doing is they are slowly cutting allocation to the dealers that are charging over MSRP. And this is big news because this is not what manufacturers typically do. What manufacturers typically do is they divvy out allocation based on dealership volume, like the amount of cars they sell, and then also their sales conversion rate. So what a manufacturer will do is they'll look at how many vehicles they gave to a dealership and then how many of those vehicles that dealership sold. And again, it's not necessarily like a straightforward process. It's like if one dealership sells 100% of their allocation, but their allocation is really small, the manufacturer's not going to all of a sudden just give a bunch of allocation to that dealership. They like to slowly increase allocation over time to see how much that dealership can handle, how much the market that that dealership is in can handle. But regardless, manufacturers typically will look at that, percentage number, right? So if a dealership gets, let's say 100 cars and they sell 80 of those 100 cars, then, they've got an 80% sales conversion rate, which is actually really good, frankly, for a lot of dealers. Then the manufacturer's like, okay, we'll give this dealership more cars because the other dealership that's in their region, they only have a sales conversion rate of, let's say 70%, right? And then it becomes kind of like this self-fulfilling, positive feedback loop type situation, because the dealership that had the higher sales conversion rate, gets more cars, and then because they get more cars, then they end up selling more cars because they usually get better cars on top of that. But regardless, that's how the system typically works. However, what these automakers are now doing is they're actually pulling back. And so what this looks like practically is manufacturers are going out into the world and they're finding dealers that are charging over MSRP, and then they are slowly cutting allocation from those dealers and giving that allocation to dealers that are not charging over MSRP. Now, there's a number of ways that manufacturers find out if a dealer is charging over MSRP. The first way and the easiest way is they just look at the dealer's website and they see if the dealer has some sort of addendum tacked onto the website. But a lot of dealers have kind of realized that that's something that they shouldn't do because they usually get in trouble with the automaker, right? They usually get a call from someone at corporate saying, hey, why are you charging over MSRP for these vehicles? And so most dealers have pulled back and they no longer post these over MSRP prices on their websites. They usually just post the MSRP. I've talked about this over the course of several videos. And so the manufacturers have to do a little bit more legwork to find out what dealers are charging over and which dealers aren't. And so they'll basically make themselves into mystery shoppers. They'll submit internet leads, they'll call into the dealerships, and in some cases, I've heard that manufacturers have literally had representatives go into the dealerships themselves and basically fake buy a car to see what the pricing is that they get. And once they get the information that they need, that information in terms of the pricing, then they start to decide how they're going to divvy out allocation. And what this looks like over time is just this slow kind of trickle effect where they slowly dam up the allocation of the dealers charging over MSRP, and then they slowly trickle in more allocation for the dealers that don't charge over MSRP. And I've had some dealers tell me that it's been it's become a pretty big difference where their competitors are now getting twice as much allocation as what they were getting before. And now they're, again, pulling back, and now they're like, okay, we need to kind of change how we're doing things. But it's kind of a catch-22 situation because the dealers that are charging over MSRP, they're now getting their allocation pulled, then go, well, supply is even tighter. So then they're more incentivized to charge even more over MSRP because, again, they have even less supply. And so it's kind of like this positive feedback loop, but in the worst possible way. And so ultimately, I imagine it will, obviously hit a point where the dealer's like, okay, our allocation is so much less than our competitors and it doesn't make any sense, right? Logically, based on their sales conversion rate. And so then they're going to talk to the manufacturer. Maybe the manufacturer will finally admit, which is very doubtful because this could get the manufacturer in trouble, right? Because they're supposed to divvy out allocation based on merit, right, in the form of sales conversion rather than based on a dealership's pricing on a car. And so the dealer could hypothetically have, a point to sue the manufacturer, but I'm kind of diving a little bit too much into the weeds. The point that I'm trying to make here is that this is starting to slowly push dealers to no longer charge over MSRP because of this loss of allocation. And then the dealers that are getting more allocation, they're even more incentivized to discount the vehicle even more because now they have even more allocation than they had before. And so then they're like, well, we have all these cars and a lot of them, right, are unsold because they have more cars than they expected to get. And so then the way that they're going to sell them is by discounting them. And so then in that case, it's like a positive feedback loop, but in a good way for the customer. So in summary, over MSRP sales have been a huge issue over the course of the last couple of years, and automakers are fighting back, but not every single fight is equal, because some automakers are all talk and no walk, and there are other automakers that are all walk and no talk, which is definitely the thing that I prefer, because this is what actually makes like meaningful change within the automotive world. And in terms of like my personal opinion on this whole situation, I think that this is going to be really effective in getting rid of dealer markups, because what's going to happen is these dealers are going to see that their competitors are getting more cars and they're selling more cars, and they're going to be like, what the heck? They're going to be calling the automakers, they're going to be like, what's happening? And then the automaker is going to be like, yeah, this and right. Again, they're probably going to run them around in some circles, and then the dealers are going to realize, okay, the only way we get out of this is we got to stop charging over MSRP. We got to tell the automaker we're no longer going to charge over MSRP. Can you please give us back our normal allocation, right? Can you give us back the goodies? And I'm sure that there are some dealers that are going to try to sue the automakers. But again, since they're being quiet about this, since they are just slowly kind of reallocating things, I think it's one of those things where, again, I'm not a legal expert, but I think that it would be pretty difficult for a dealership to sue a manufacturer because, their competitor's getting more allocation. It's like the manufacturer gets to determine allocation at the end of the day. It's their right that they choose to sell their, because again, you got to remember, dealerships are customers for the manufacturers. They get to choose to sell the car to one dealer versus another. Let me know what you guys think about this. Let me know if you think this is the approach to do to fix over MSRP sales, or what do you think is a practical way to fix this? Because if you say that it's direct-to-consumer sales, I've said this a million times, it's just not practical. It's not reasonable for the structure we have here in the US. We have to deal with dealers. Dealers are an inevitability with the current car market that we have. Maybe in the future, when the car market's different, maybe that'll be a market where we won't have dealers, but we'll see. I'll see ya.